They called her a trophy wife who was past her to prime. When Richard Sterling divorced Eleanor, he didn't just leave her, he obliterated her. He took the house, the accounts, and even her dignity, laughing as he flew off in his Gulf Stream while she was left counting change for a bus ticket. He thought he had buried her. But Richard forgot one thing. You have to be careful who you discard on the way up, because you might just meet them on the way back down. This is the story of how a woman with nothing but a suitcase returned to buy the very ground her ex-husband walked on. The sound of the gavel hitting the mahogany block echoed like a gunshot in the sterile air of the Manhattan courtroom. To Eleanor Vance, it sounded like the final nail in a coffin she hadn't realized she was lying inside of until it was too late. "Judgment is granted in favor of the petitioner, Mr. Sterling," Judge Harrison said, his voice bored, shuffling papers as if he were ordering a sandwich rather than dismantling a human life. "The prenuptial agreement stands. Ms. Vance is to vacate the property at 450 East 52nd Street within 48 hours. No spousal support is awarded, given the infidelity clause." Eleanor gripped the edge of the defendant's table so hard her knuckles turned the color of bone. "But I didn't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I never cheated. The photos were faked. Richard knows they were faked." She turned to look at the man she had spent the last 10 years supporting. Richard Sterling sat at the adjacent table, leaning back in his Italian leather chair. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Eleanor's father had made in a year. He wasn't looking at her. He was checking his watch, a Patek Philippe Nautilus, as if the destruction of his wife was taking just a few minutes too long. His lawyer, a shark named Marcus Stone, who smelled of expensive cologne and moral decay, leaned over and whispered something to Richard. Richard smirked. That smirk! It was the expression of a man who played chess while everyone else was playing checkers. "Order," the judge said, not unkindly, but firmly. "The evidence provided by the private investigator was conclusive, Miss Vance. The geotagged metadata, the hotel receipts, it is irrefutable." It was a setup. Eleanor knew it. Richard had been planning to upgrade his life for a year. His tech startup, EtherStream, had just gone public, turning him from a wealthy man into a billionaire overnight. Eleanor had been there when they were eating instant noodles in a studio apartment in Brooklyn. She had proofread his pitch decks. She had charmed investors when Richard was too abrasive. She had been the glue. But new billionaires don't want glue. They want glitter. And Richard had found his glitter in a 22-year-old Instagram model named Candy. Court adjourned. Richard stood up, buttoning his jacket. He finally looked at Eleanor. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth that used to be there when he promised her the world. "Richard," Eleanor said, standing up, her legs trembling. "You know I was at my sister's that weekend. You hacked my phone. You planted that data." Richard walked over, stopping just inches from her. He leaned in, his voice a low, smooth baritone that used to make her heart flutter. Now, it made her blood run cold. "Ellie," he said, using the nickname he knew she loved. "Who are they going to believe? The man who just donated $2 million to the Grand Library Fund, or the desperate housewife trying to claw half a fortune she didn't earn?" "I helped you build that fortune," she hissed, tears spilling over. "You made coffee," Richard corrected, his face hardening. "I built the empire, and frankly, you don't fit the brand anymore. You're analog. I'm digital." He turned on his heel. "Marcus, have the car bring the car around. We have a flight to catch out of Teterboro at 2:00 p.m. The Global 7500 is fueled and waiting." "The Global?" Eleanor blinked. "We don't own a Global 7500. We have the Challenger." Richard paused, looking back over his shoulder with a cruel glint in his eye. "I own a Bombardier Global 7500, Ellie. I bought it last week through a shell company in the Caymans. You see, you never really knew what I was doing. That's why you lost." He walked out of the courtroom, surrounded by a phalanx of legal aides, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the center of the room. The silence that followed was deafening. Her lawyer, a court-appointed generalist who was out of his depth, patted her awkwardly on the shoulder. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. We can try to appeal, but without money for forensic data analysis to disprove the photos, it's a long shot." "I have nothing," she whispered. "You have the settlement," the lawyer reminded her. $10,000, she laughed bitterly. "For 10 years of my life. That won't even cover the rent on a studio in this city for 3 months. Eleanor walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding afternoon sun. It felt aggressive, exposing her shame to the world. She stood on the concrete steps, clutching a plastic file folder containing her divorce decree. A gust of wind whipped her hair across her face. 50 yards away, a sleek black Maybach pulled up to the curb. Richard slid into the back seat. Before the door closed, she saw him laughing, holding a phone to his ear. He didn't even look out the window as the car pulled away, merging into the chaotic New York traffic. She was 34 years old. She had a degree in art history she hadn't used in a decade. Her resume had a 10-year gap labeled housewife, and she had just been discarded like a used napkin. She walked to the nearest subway station, the heels of her shoes clicking a mournful rhythm on the pavement. She sat on a bench, opened her purse, and counted the cash. $240. That was what she had on hand. The $10,000 check would take days to clear. She took out her phone. She opened Instagram. There, on Richard's feed, was a new post from 10 minutes ago. A picture of the tail of a massive private jet, gleaming white with a gold stripe. The caption read, "New wings, new horizons, no baggage. Global 7500, walking out to a billionaire mindset." Eleanor stared at the screen until her vision blurred. No baggage. That's what she was to him. Baggage. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. A fire, small but incredibly hot, ignited somewhere deep in her chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was rage. Pure, distilled, high-octane rage. "Baggage," she whispered to the empty subway platform. "Okay, Richard, you want to fly? Let's see how you handle turbulence." The first 6 months were a lesson in humility that bordered on torture. Eleanor moved into a basement apartment in Queens that smelled of mildew and boiled cabbage. The $10,000 evaporated quickly. Security deposit, first month's rent, a cheap laptop, and legal fees for a consultation that went nowhere. She applied for jobs. Gallery assistant? Overqualified but underexperienced. Executive assistant? We're looking for someone younger. Retail? Can you work nights and weekends for minimum wage? She took the retail job. For 3 months, the woman who used to host galas for Silicon Valley elites was folding denim jeans at a Gap in a strip mall. She saw women she used to know come in. She would duck behind the racks, heart pounding, terrified of being recognized. But the rage kept her awake at night. She spent her evenings in the library or on her cheap Wi-Fi, researching. She wasn't researching Richard. She was researching his new obsession, aviation. She remembered what he said about the Global 7500. She remembered the shell companies. Richard had always been sloppy with details he considered beneath him. He relied on lawyers to hide things, but lawyers were only as good as the information they were given. One night, eating a cup of instant noodles, she found a forum for private pilots. They were discussing the grey market of private charters, how billionaires would lease their jets out to offset costs often skirting FAA regulations to save on taxes. A light bulb went off. Richard was cheap. Despite his billions, he hated paying taxes. He hated wasting money. Eleanor needed to get close to that world. She quit the Gap the next day and took a train to Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. She walked into the FBO, fixed base operator, the luxury terminal where the ultra-rich boarded their flights. It was like a 5-star hotel lobby. Marble floors, free espresso, leather armchairs. She wasn't there to fly. She walked up to the cleaning service manager's office around the back. "I need a job," she told the burly man named Frank. "We got a spot on the night crew, cleaning interiors. $12 an hour. Hard work. Some of these rich folks leave a mess you wouldn't believe." "I'll take it." For the next year, Eleanor Vance became a ghost. She wore a grey jumpsuit and tied her hair back. She scrubbed vomit out of shag carpets on Cessna Citations. She picked up empty champagne bottles from Gulf Streams. She polished the mahogany tray tables of Falcon 8As until she could see her own tired reflection. But she was doing more than cleaning. She was listening, and she was reading. She found discarded flight manifests. She found maintenance logs left on seats. She saw how the pilots talked to the owners. She learned the difference between a Part 91 operation, private, and Part 135, charter. She learned that a Gulfstream G650ER burned about 500 gallons of fuel per hour, and that if you didn't shop around for fuel contracts, you were bleeding money. She learned the language of the tarmac, APU, squawk codes, slot times. One rainy Tuesday in November, she was cleaning a Dassault Falcon 900LX. The owner, an elderly man with kind eyes and a cane, was still on board, arguing with his pilot. "I can't believe the management fees are this high, Dave," the man shouted. $20,000 a month just for record keeping, plus the hangar. I'm bleeding dry here." "Mr. Henderson," the pilot sighed. "That's the standard rate with Jetlux. They control the hangar space. I can't do anything about it." The man, Mr. Henderson, threw his hands up and slumped in his seat. The pilot walked into the cockpit to run checklists. Eleanor was wiping down the galley. She shouldn't speak. The invisible staff never speaks. But she recognized the name of the management company, Jetlux. She had cleaned 3 of their planes that week. They were sloppy. They overcharged for catering and marked up fuel by 30%. "Excuse me, sir," Eleanor said softly. Mr. Henderson looked up, startled. He looked at her jumpsuit, then her face. He saw intelligence there that didn't match the bucket of rags in her hand. "Yes?" "I couldn't help but overhear. Jetlux is charging you $20,000 for management?" "That's right," he grumbled. "Sir, are you aware that Jetlux batches their fuel purchases but charges you the retail transient rate? They're making a spread of about $2 per gallon on your fuel. If you fly 300 hours a year, they aren't just charging you $20,000. They're taking an extra $150,000 from you in hidden fuel markups." Mr. Henderson sat up straighter. "How the hell do you know that?" "I clean the receipts out of the trash," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "And I check the spot prices at the FBO. Also, their hangar fee includes concierge services that they outsource to us. We get paid minimum wage. They charge you a premium." The old man narrowed his eyes. "You're a cleaner." "I am right now. But I used to manage the household finances for a portfolio worth $3 billion. Mr. Henderson looked at her for a long time. "What's your name?" "Eleanor. Eleanor Vance." "Well, Eleanor Vance, put down the rag. Come sit here. Tell me how I get out of this contract." That night, Eleanor didn't scrub any toilets. She sat with Arthur Henderson, a real estate mogul from Chicago, and redlined his aircraft management contract. She showed him exactly where they were gouging him. By the time the sun came up, she had saved him nearly $250,000 a year. "You're wasting your time with that spray bottle," Arthur said as he prepared to leave. He pulled a business card from his pocket. It was heavy, cream-colored stock. "I have a friend, a woman named Sarah Jenkins. She runs a boutique aviation brokerage in White Plains. She's honest, which means she's struggling. She needs a shark. And frankly, my dear, you have teeth." Eleanor took the card. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Don't thank me. Just make sure when you get back on top, you don't use those teeth on me." Eleanor quit the cleaning job that morning. She took the last of her savings and bought a suit from a consignment shop. It was a vintage Chanel, slightly out of season, but it fit her like armor. She took the train to White Plains. She walked into the office of Jenkins Aviation. It was a small office, cluttered with model planes and charts. Sarah Jenkins looked up from a messy desk. She looked tired. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked. "Mr. Henderson sent me," Eleanor said, placing the card on the desk. "I know how the big management firms are stealing from their clients. I know where the bodies are buried in the fuel contracts. I want to work for you. Commission only. If I don't bring you a client in 30 days, you fire me." Sarah looked at the card, then at Eleanor's determined jawline. She smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Grab a headset, honey. The phone on that desk hasn't rung all morning. Change that." Eleanor sat down. She looked at the phone. She didn't call a client. She called the records department of the FAA. She needed to find out exactly which shell company owned N65DRS, Richards Global 7500. It was time to start the climb. The aviation industry is a small world. Everyone knows everyone, and rumors fly faster than sound. But nobody knew who was behind the sudden meteoric rise of Jenkins and Vance. They just knew that a new player was poaching clients from the biggest firms in the country, and they were doing it with surgical precision. Eleanor sat in a glass-walled conference room in White Plains. She looked different. The nervous, broken woman in the thrift store coat was gone. In her place sat a shark in a tailored Armani suit, her hair cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob. Across from her sat Gregory Pike, a hedge fund manager who owned a fleet of 3 Gulfstream G650s. He looked annoyed. "I don't have time for this, Miss Vance," Pike said, checking his phone. "I've been with Apex Aviation for 10 years. They handle everything." "They certainly do," Eleanor said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table, "including charging you for de-icing fluid in Miami in July." Pike froze. He looked at the paper. It was a line-item audit of his last 6 months of invoices. "That's impossible," Pike muttered. "It's not impossible, it's hidden," Eleanor said coolly. "They bundle it under safety and weather protocols. They also charge you for 3 pilots on domestic flights when you only fly with 2. And that hangar fee? You're paying for a heated hangar in Teterboro, but your GPS logs show your planes are parked outside on the ramp 90% of the time." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Mr. Pike, by my calculation, Apex has stolen $1.4 million from you in the last 24 months. I don't want a retainer. I want 20% of the money I save you in year 1. After that, we negotiate." Pike looked at the paper, then at Eleanor. He picked up his pen. "Where do I sign?" This was Eleanor's superpower. She didn't just sell planes. She audited the lives of the rich. She knew their secrets because she knew their receipts. She knew that billionaire A was secretly flying his mistress to Cabo, and billionaire B was terrified of flying over water. She monetized information. Sarah Jenkins, now her equal partner, walked in as Pike left. You did it again, Elle. That's the third whale this month. I'm not done, Eleanor said, turning to the window. She wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at a notification on her tablet. She had set up a Google alert 3 years ago. Keywords: Richard Sterling, EtherStream, N655RS. For years it had been nothing but puff pieces about Richard's genius, but lately the tone had shifted. EtherStream misses earnings. Tech CEO Richard Sterling sued for patent infringement. Sterling sells Hampton's estate. Sarah, Eleanor said, her voice dropping an octave, pull the FAA title registry. I want to see the lien holder status on a Bombardier Global 7500, tail number November, 650 Romeo Sierra. Sarah typed on her laptop. That's Richard's plane, isn't it? Just check it. Sarah frowned at the screen. That's odd. The primary lien holder is Silicon Valley Bank, but there's a secondary mechanics lien filed by a maintenance facility in Zurich. He hasn't paid his service bills in 6 months, Elle. And, oh, wow. What? He's listed it. Quietly. It's a pocket listing. He's trying to dump it fast. Asking price is $45 million. That's $10 million under market value. Eleanor smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who just smelled blood in the water. He needs cash, Eleanor whispered. The walls are closing in. Richard Sterling was sweating. He hated sweating. It ruined the Egyptian cotton of his shirt. He paced the floor of his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The apartment was empty. Candy, the Instagram model, had left 2 months ago when the credit card started getting declined. She had called him a loser and posted a TikTok about it. Marcus, Richard barked into his phone. Why hasn't the plane sold? I need that liquidity by Friday or the board votes me out. We're trying, Richard. Marcus Stone's voice came through the speaker, sounding strained. But the maintenance logs are incomplete. Buyers are spooked, and word is out that you're distressed. The vultures are circling. They're lowballing us. I don't care. Sell it to a scrap dealer if you have to. I need 30 million net to cover the margin call on the stock. Richard ended the call and poured himself a scotch. His hand shook. EtherStream was a house of cards. He had cooked the books to inflate the valuation, and now the SEC was sniffing around. His only way out was to liquidate his personal assets, pay off the debts, and flee to a jurisdiction with no extradition treaty before the indictments came down. He needed the jet to sell, but he also needed a jet to leave. It was a catch-22. His plan was desperate. Sell the Global 7500, use the cash to pay the lawyers and the banks, and then charter a flight to the Maldives. The phone rang. It was Marcus. I got an offer, Marcus said. It's aggressive. An anonymous holding company called Nemesis Ventures. They're offering $38 million, cash, closing in 48 hours. 38? That's robbery, Richard screamed. It's cash, Richard, and they're waiving the pre-buy inspection. Nobody waives the pre-buy on a global. They want the asset now. Take the deal. Richard gritted his teeth. Waiving the inspection meant they wouldn't see the corrosion in the tail section. It was a stupid buyer. He could fleece them. Fine, Richard snapped. Draw up the papers. But I need a clause. I need to retain possession of the aircraft for 72 hours post-closing. I have a business trip. I'll ask, Marcus said. 10 minutes later, Marcus called back. They agreed. But they want a hard clause. If you aren't off the plane by 5:00 p.m. on Friday, the penalty is significant. And the closing happens in person. The buyer's representative wants to hand you the check. I don't care who hands me the check as long as it clears, Richard said. Friday is the court hearing for the shareholder lawsuit. I'll sign the papers, go to court, win the motion, and fly out. Richard, Marcus warned, if you lose in court— I never lose, Richard said, staring at his reflection in the glass. He looked older, tired, but his ego was still intact. Set it up. Friday morning was grey and miserable in New York City. The clouds hung low, obscuring the tops of the skyscrapers. Eleanor stood in her office, looking at the document on her desk. It was the bill of sale for N650RS. "You sure about this, Elle?" Sarah asked, standing in the doorway. $38 million is a lot of risk. If the engine program is lapsed, we're looking at another $4 million in maintenance. "It's not about the money," Eleanor said, running her hand over the paper. "And besides, I already have a buyer lined up in Dubai for $50 million once we clean up the records. This is a flip. But first, it's a lesson. He doesn't know it's you. No, Nemesis Ventures is a blind trust registered in Delaware. My name appears nowhere until I countersign the final title transfer." Eleanor checked her watch. The closing was done electronically an hour ago. "The money is in his escrow account. The title is mine. But per the contract, he thinks he has the plane until 5 p.m. "Where is he now?" Sarah asked. "He's at the Southern District Court of New York. The SEC filed charges this morning. He thinks he's going there to get a dismissal. He doesn't know the DOJ is waiting with an arrest warrant." "Wait," Sarah's eyes widened. "If he gets arrested, the plane gets impounded as evidence of flight risk assets." "Not if it doesn't belong to him anymore," Eleanor smirked. "I bought it at 9 a.m. The warrant drops at noon. For those 3 hours the plane is in limbo, but legally it's mine, and I'm going to make sure he knows it." "You're going to the courthouse," Sarah realized. "He took everything from me outside a courthouse," Eleanor said, picking up her coat. It was a white trench coat, crisp and immaculate. "It's only poetic that I return the favor." "He thinks he's flying to the Maldives today, Elle." "He thinks a lot of things," Eleanor said, walking to the door. "Call the pilot. Tell him to reposition the jet from Teterboro to LaGuardia. Tell him to file a flight plan for, let's say, nowhere. And tell the crew to strip the interior of anything that belongs to Mr. Sterling. I want it clean. You're enjoying this too much," Sarah said, half concerned, half admiring. "Sarah," Eleanor paused, her hand on the doorknob. "For 5 years, I was the woman who cried in the rain. Today, I'm the weather." Eleanor walked out to her waiting car, a sleek, black Lincoln Navigator. "To the federal courthouse," she told the driver, "and then to the tarmac." Inside the courthouse, Richard Sterling was having the worst day of his life. The judge was not amused by his lawyer's antics. The courtroom was packed with angry investors. "Mr. Sterling," the judge boomed, "you are ordered to surrender your passport immediately. You are considered a flight risk." "Objection!" Marcus Stone shouted. "My client has cooperated fully." "Overruled. Bail is set at $50 million. Richard turned pale. $50 million. He had just sold the plane for 38. He was short. He turned to Marcus. "Get me out of here. I need to get to the plane. Once we're in international airspace, they can't touch me." "Richard, you can't run," Marcus hissed. "The marshals are watching." "Watch me." Richard caused a diversion. A fainting spell by his junior associate, staged, of course, created chaos. In the confusion, Richard slipped out the side exit. It was a felony, fleeing custody. But he was desperate. He ran out the side doors of the courthouse, into the alleyway, and flagged down a black SUV that he thought was his Uber. It wasn't his Uber. The window rolled down. Eleanor Vance sat in the back seat, wearing oversized sunglasses. "Get in, Richard," she said calmly. Richard froze. He blinked, thinking he was hallucinating. "Ellie? Get in. The marshals are coming around the corner in about 10 seconds. If you want to see your plane one last time, get in." panic overrides logic. Richard opened the door and jumped in. "Go! Go! Just drive!" The car pulled away, just as the U.S. Marshals burst out of the courthouse doors. "What are you doing here?" Richard panted, loosening his tie. "How did you—" "Look, I don't have time for your pity. I have a plane to catch." "I know," Eleanor said, looking straight ahead. "I read the contract. You have possession until 5 p.m. "Contract? What do you know about the contract?" Richard looked at her, really looked at her. The cheap clothes were gone. She smelled of Joe Malone, perfume, and money. "Who are you working for? Are you assisting the buyer?" Eleanor turned to him slowly, removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. "Richard, I am the buyer." The interior of the Lincoln Navigator was silent, save for the hum of the tires on the asphalt. Richard Sterling sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, looking at the woman he had divorced 5 years ago. "Nemesis Ventures," Richard whispered, the realization dawning on him like a slow-acting poison. "Nemesis. That was you." "Goddess of divine retribution," Eleanor clarified, checking her manicure. "I thought it was fitting. You always did love Greek mythology, didn't you, Richard? Or was that just something you put in your bio to sound intellectual?" "This isn't possible," Richard stammered, his arrogance cracking to reveal the terrified child underneath. "You had nothing. You were penniless. I made sure of it." "You made sure I had no money," Eleanor corrected. "You forgot that I had a brain. And you forgot that while you were busy chasing fame and 20-year-old models, you left a paper trail a mile wide. Did you really think you could skim off the top of the pension fund without anyone noticing?" "I noticed, Richard. I noticed 3 years ago when I audited a flight log for one of your board members." Richard's face went white. You told them?" "I didn't have to. I just organized the data. The SEC did the rest." The car merged onto the highway, leading to the private airfield. Richard looked out the window, desperation clawing at his throat. "Why pick me up?" he asked, his voice trembling. "If you hate me, why save me from the marshals?" Eleanor turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I didn't save you, Richard. I'm delivering you." "What? You have a contract," Eleanor said calmly. "You insisted on possession of the aircraft until 5 p.m. I am a woman of my word. I am taking you to your plane." "So I can leave?" Hope flared in Richard's eyes. "You're letting me fly out?" "I'm taking you to the plane," she repeated. "What happens after that is up to the authorities." "You can't do this. I'm Richard Sterling." "Not anymore," Eleanor said coldly. "Now, you're just a liability, and I just bought your only asset at a discount." The car swept through the security gates of the airfield. They bypassed the main terminal and drove straight onto the tarmac. There it was, the Bombardier Global 7500. It was a magnificent machine, gleaming white under the grey sky. The engines were already spooling up, the heat haze shimmering behind the exhaust. Richard's heart leaped. The stairs were down. The crew was there. If he could just get on board, seal the door and taxi, he could argue jurisdiction later. He just needed to get in the air. The car stopped 20 feet from the stairs. "Get out," Eleanor said. Richard didn't wait. He scrambled out of the car, stumbling on the tarmac. He ran toward the stairs, his tie flapping over his shoulder, a pathetic figure of fallen grace. "Captain!" Richard shouted at the pilot standing at the base of the stairs. "Captain Miller, get the engines to full power. We leave now." Captain Miller, a man Richard had employed for 4 years, didn't move. He stood with his arms crossed, wearing a uniform that looked slightly different. The EtherStream logo was gone from his lapel. In its place was a pin with a stylized E and V logo. "Captain!" Richard screamed, reaching the stairs. "Did you hear me? I said we are leaving." "I hear you, Mr. Sterling," Captain Miller said, his voice level. "But I can't take orders from a passenger." "Passenger? I own this plane." "Actually," Miller said, looking past Richard to the woman walking slowly across the tarmac in her white trench coat. "You don't. The registration changed at 9 a.m. this morning. I work for Miss Vance now." Richard spun around. Eleanor stopped a few feet away. The wind caught her hair, framing her face. She looked like a queen surveying a conquered kingdom. "You can't do this," Richard hissed. "The contract. Possession until 5 p.m. "Possession means you can sit in it," Eleanor said, checking her watch. "It doesn't mean you can fly it. I own the fuel, I own the pilots, and I haven't authorized a flight plan." "You vindictive witch!" Richard lunged toward her. Two large men in dark suits stepped out from behind the landing gear. They weren't airport security. "That's close enough, Mr. Sterling," one of them said. Richard froze. He looked around. The airport was silent. Too silent. Then the sound of sirens cut through the air. The Lincoln Navigator came to a halt on the tarmac of the private airfield, the tires crunching over loose gravel. Outside, the world was grey and hostile. The wind whipped across the open concrete, carrying the sharp chemical scent of Jet A1 fuel, the smell of money, travel, and escape. Inside the car, the silence was heavier than lead. Richard Sterling sat frozen, his hand still gripping the door handle. He stared at the woman sitting next to him. For years, he had pictured her destitute. He had imagined her working a checkout counter or living in a studio apartment in New Jersey, regretting the day she bored him. He had never, in his wildest nightmares, imagined this. She was immaculate. The cut of her white coat, the way she held her chin, the cold, predatory intelligence in her eyes. It wasn't just a makeover. It was a metamorphosis. "Nemesis," Richard whispered, his voice cracking. The word hung in the air between them. "The holding company. Nemesis Ventures. That was you." Eleanor didn't look at him. She looked out the window at the sleek, white Bombardier Global 7500, waiting 50 yards away. The heat haze from its auxiliary power unit shimmered in the air, distorting the horizon. "Nemesis," Eleanor repeated softly. "The goddess who enacts retribution against those who succumb to hubris. Arrogance before the gods. I thought it was fitting. You always did think you were a god, Richard." "This is impossible," Richard stammered, his mind racing to find a logical explanation, a loophole, an escape hatch. "You were broke. I made sure of it. I froze the accounts. I blacklisted you. I saw the receipts. You were cleaning planes. You were a janitor." Eleanor turned her head slowly. Her gaze was physical, hitting him with the force of a slap. "I was. And you know what you learn when you clean the toilets of the ultra-wealthy, Richard. You learn where the bodies are buried. You learn that men like you, men who think they are untouchable, are actually the most careless people on earth. You leave your manifests on the seat. You leave your burner phones in the side pockets. You talk to your lawyers on speakerphone while the help is polishing the tray table." She leaned in closer, and Richard flinched. "I didn't just scrub your floors," she hissed. "I studied your architecture. I watched you leverage EtherStream to the hilt. I watched you hide debt in shell companies. I watched you bleed your liquidity dry to keep candy and diamonds." At the mention of his ex-mistress, Richard's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. "Don't you speak about her?" "Why not? She spoke about you." Eleanor smiled, a razor-thin expression. "She sold her story to a tabloid last week. Who do you think brokered the deal? She needed cash. You weren't paying her anymore. It's amazing how quickly loyalty evaporates when the credit card is declined. Richard felt the walls of his reality crumbling. He looked out the window at the jet. His jet. It was right there. If he could just get on board, if he could just get the door sealed, he was safe. The laws of the tarmac were different. Once the door was closed, he was in command. "I don't have time for this," Richard snapped, the panic overriding his shock. He grabbed the door handle. "I have a contract. The sale agreement grants me possession until 5 p.m. It's 2:15. Legally, that is my plane for the next 3 hours." "Possession," Eleanor said calmly, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "It's a funny legal term, Richard. It implies physical control. But ownership is different." "I'm leaving," Richard screamed. He shoved the car door open and stumbled out onto the windy tarmac. The cold air hit him, biting through his expensive but thin suit. He nearly tripped over his own Italian leather shoes as he scrambled toward the aircraft. He looked like a madman, tie askew, hair whipped by the wind, eyes wide with terror. "Captain!" Richard bellowed, waving his arms at the figure standing at the base of the air stairs. "Captain Miller, start the engines. We need an immediate departure. Forget the slot time, just go." He ran across the pavement, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness of the airfield. He was 50 feet away. 40. 30. Captain Miller, a man who had flown Richard to Davos, to Monaco, to the Seychelles, stood at the bottom of the stairs. He wasn't moving. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart, arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't wearing the standard Etherstream uniform anymore. The epaulets on his shoulders were gold and black. "Miller!" Richard gasped, reaching the red carpet runner that led to the stairs. "What are you doing? Get inside. Prep the cockpit." "I can't do that, Mr. Sterling," Miller said. His voice was not the deferential tone Richard was used to. It was the voice of a man who finally had a boss he respected. "What did you say to me?" Richard stopped, panting, his chest heaving. "I pay your salary. I own you." "Actually," Miller said, looking past Richard, "you haven't paid my salary in 3 months. The pension contribution was missed twice, and as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, my contract was purchased by Jenkins and Vance Aviation." Richard froze. He spun around. Eleanor was walking across the tarmac. She didn't run. She glided. The wind caught the hem of her trench coat, making it billow behind her like a cape. 2 large men in dark suits and sunglasses flanked her, walking in perfect unison. She stopped 10 feet from Richard. The distance was deliberate. It was the distance of a judge looking down from the bench. "You can't do this," Richard pleaded, his voice dropping to a pathetic whine. "The contract. The clause." "I read the clause, Richard. I wrote the clause," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the wind. "Clause 14, Section B. Seller retains right of possession for personal transport, subject to owner's operational approval regarding fuel, crew, and flight path safety." She took a step forward. "I am the owner," she said. "I own the fuel in the wings. I own the tires on the landing gear. I own the navigation database. And I have deemed your flight path unsafe." "I'll sue you," Richard screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I'll bury you in litigation for 20 years. I have Marcus. I have the best lawyers in New York." "Do you?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen and held it up. "Why don't we ask him?" She put the phone on speaker. "Marcus, you're on with Richard." Richard lunged for the phone, but one of the bodyguards stepped forward, a wall of muscle blocking his path. Richard recoiled. "Marcus!" Richard shouted at the phone. "Marcus, tell her! Tell her I have possession. Get an injunction. Call the FAA." The voice that came through the phone was tinny, distant, and sounded incredibly weary. "Richard, I can't do that." "What do you mean you can't? You work for me." "I resigned, Richard," Marcus said. 10 minutes ago, the SEC just raided my office. They have the emails, Richard. The ones where you told me to falsify the revenue projections. They have everything. I'm cutting a deal. I suggest you do the same." Click. The line went dead. Richard stared at the phone in Eleanor's hand. The silence that followed was absolute. The hum of the distant highway, the wind, the idling APU of the jet, it all faded into a buzzing white noise in his ears. He was alone. Truly, completely alone. He looked at Eleanor. For the first time, he didn't see an adversary. He saw the woman he had married. He saw the woman who had held his hand when his mother died. He saw the woman who had believed in him when nobody else did. He tried to play the only card he had left, the emotional manipulation card. He slumped his shoulders. He made his eyes wide and watery. He took a step toward her, hands open, palms up. "Ellie," he whispered, using the name only she used to use. "Ellie, please, look at us. It's me. It's Rich. Remember the studio in Brooklyn? Remember the pizza on the floor? We built this together. I lost my way. I admit it. I got greedy. I got stupid. But don't let them take me to prison. I can't survive in there." He reached out a hand, trembling. "We were partners once. Doesn't that mean anything?" Eleanor looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. Her expression softened, just for a fraction of a second. Richard's heart leapt. He had her. She was still the soft-hearted woman he knew. "It meant everything to me," Eleanor said quietly. "Yes," Richard breathed, stepping closer. "Yes, it did." "It meant everything," Eleanor continued, her voice hardening like concrete setting in the sun. "Until the day I stood in that courtroom and begged you to tell the truth about the photos. I begged you, Richard. I looked you in the eye, and I begged you not to destroy my reputation for a lie. Do you remember what you said?" Richard swallowed hard. He remembered. "You said, 'It's just business, Ellie.'" Eleanor's eyes blazed with a cold fire. "Well, Richard, this isn't personal. It's just business." She nodded to the bodyguards. "Secure the stairs." "No!" Richard shrieked, the mask falling away. "No, you vindictive witch! I made you. You were nothing. You are nothing." He turned and bolted for the stairs, trying to push past Captain Miller. "Get out of my way! I'm boarding this plane!" "Stand down!" Miller shouted, putting a hand on Richard's chest. "Get off me!" Richard threw a punch, a wild, desperate swing that grazed the pilot's jaw. Suddenly, the world erupted in noise. From the perimeter of the airfield, sirens wailed, a rising, terrifying crescendo. 3 black SUVs with government plates tore across the tarmac, bypassing the security checkpoint. They drifted around the wing of the Global 7500, tires smoking, boxing Richard in against the fuselage. Men in tactical gear poured out. "Federal agents, drop to the ground, now!" Richard stumbled back, looking wildly from the agents to the plane to Eleanor. "Richard Sterling!" a lead agent shouted, leveling a weapon. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and flight to avoid prosecution. Get on the ground!" Richard didn't move. He stood trembling, looking at the open door of the jet. It was right there. Freedom. Luxury. The life he deserved. "Ground, now!" An agent tackled him. Richard hit the tarmac hard, his face pressed against the oil-stained concrete. The breath was knocked out of him. He felt a knee in his back, the cold steel of handcuffs biting into his wrists. "You're making a mistake," Richard sobbed into the ground. "I have a plane. I have a flight plan." Eleanor walked forward. The agents didn't stop her. They knew who she was. She had been the one to tip them off about the flight time. She stood over Richard, looking down at his pathetic form. He twisted his head to look up at her, gravel embedded in his cheek. "Why?" he wheezed. "You have the money. You have the plane. Why this?" Eleanor crouched down, her white coat brushing the ground, heedless of the dirt. She lowered her sunglasses, locking eyes with him one last time. "Because you didn't just break the marriage, Richard. You broke the rules," she whispered. "You thought the world was a playground where you could break people and toys and just walk away. I'm just putting the toys back in the box." She stood up and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was an old photograph, a Polaroid of the two of them in their first apartment, eating noodles. She had carried it in her wallet for 10 years. She dropped the photo. It fluttered down, landing next to his face on the tarmac. "Goodbye, Richard." She turned her back on him. "Take him away," the agent ordered. Eleanor walked toward the stairs of the jet. She didn't look back as they dragged him to the SUV. She didn't look back as he screamed her name. She didn't look back as the heavy doors of the federal vehicle slammed shut, sealing his fate. She reached the bottom of the stairs. Captain Miller was rubbing his jaw, but he was smiling. "You okay, Captain?" Eleanor asked. "Never better, Miss Vance," Miller said. "He always did have a weak left hook." "I added a hazard pay bonus to your account this morning," Eleanor said. "And Miller? Let's get that repainted. I'm thinking a deep navy blue with gold accents. Ether Stream White is so last season. Navy and gold, a classic choice." Eleanor ascended the stairs. Her heels clicked on the metal steps, a rhythm of victory. She reached the top and stepped inside the cabin. It was silent. It was cool. It smelled of potential. She walked past the galley, past the crew rest area, and into the main cabin. The leather seats were cream-colored, soft as butter. She walked to the master seat, the throne Richard had sat in while he plotted his schemes. She ran her hand over the headrest. Then she sat down. She pressed the button to swivel the chair toward the window. Outside, the convoy of federal vehicles was driving away, a snake of red and blue lights fading into the gray afternoon. She watched until they were just specks, until Richard Sterling was nothing more than a bad memory. "Miss Vance?" The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, no relation to her partner, but a nice touch of continuity, stood there holding a silver tray. On it was a crystal flute and a chilled bottle. "We have the Dom Perignon," or I found a bottle of Richard's private stock, a 1950 Macallan, hidden in the back. Eleanor smiled. "Pour the whiskey down the sink. I don't want the aftertaste. I'll take the champagne." "Excellent choice." The cork popped, a festive sound in the quiet cabin. The golden liquid fizzed into the glass. Eleanor took it. "Captain," she pressed the intercom button. "Status?" "We are cleared for taxi, Miss Vance. Flight plan to Paris is filed. Estimated time en route, 7 hours and 12 minutes. The weather in Paris is clear." "Take us up, Captain." The door motor whirred, and the heavy main door of the Global 7500 swung shut. The locking pins engaged with a solid, reassuring thunk. The cabin pressurized, hissing softly, sealing her in her own private world. The engines began to whine, a high-pitched scream of power that vibrated through the floor. Eleanor felt the thrust push her back into the seat as the plane began to move. They taxied past the spot where Richard had been arrested. It was empty now. Just a patch of oil on the ground. The plane turned onto the runway. The engines roared to full power. The acceleration was immense, a physical force that pinned her down, heavier than gravity. Eleanor watched the ground rush by, the fences, the trees, the grey city that had once chewed her up and spit her out. Then the nose lifted. The rumble of the wheels ceased. The ground fell away. They were airborne. Eleanor sipped her champagne. She watched the horizon tilt. They punched through the layer of grey clouds that had hung over New York all day. Suddenly, the cabin was flooded with blinding, golden sunlight. They were above the weather, above the clouds, above the noise. She pulled a folder from her bag. It wasn't looking back at the past. The cover read, Project Phoenix, Acquisition Strategy for Sterling Assets. She opened the folder, clicked her pen, and began to write. The divorce was over. The reign of Eleanor Vance had just begun. They say that living well is the best revenge. But sometimes, owning the jet your ex-husband tried to escape in is a close second. Eleanor Vance proved that rock bottom isn't the end. It's just the solid foundation you need to build an empire. She took the bricks Richard threw at her and built a fortress. In the end, he was left in handcuffs on the cold concrete while she was sipping champagne at 40,000 feet. It's a reminder to all of us, your current situation is not your final destination. What did you think of Eleanor's ultimate payback? Was it too harsh, or exactly what Richard deserved? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If you want more stories about karma, justice, and turning tragedy into triumph, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you're the first to see the next video. Thanks for watching, and remember, never let anyone write your story for you. You hold the pen.